The damp autumn air of Hartford always made the late afternoons feel heavier than they actually were. I am Antonia Frost, a 34-year-old freelance graphic designer, and a single mother used to managing my own quiet world. But my entire life shattered with one phone call. My 12-year-old daughter calls me because she hears my mother screaming from my older stepbrother's room. When I arrive and walk into the room, I discover a truly horrifying scene. "Mom, please hurry, he locked the door and won't let her out." Her terrified whisper cut through the speaker, sending cold dread straight to my core. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys, ran to my SUV, and raced into the fog, desperate to stop the nightmare unfolding at my mother's house. Before we go any further, if you appreciate stories of family justice, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. 5 minutes later, my keys clinked against the steering wheel as I backed my SUV out of the driveway into the foggy streets. The damp autumn air clung to the windshield, forcing me to set the wipers to a steady rhythmic sweep as I navigated the winding, dimly lit roads of Hartford. Orange and red maple leaves slick from the recent rain plastered the dark asphalt, making my tires slip slightly whenever I took a corner too fast. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned stark white, my heart hammering against my ribs in sync with the engine's low, rumbling roar. The familiar neighborhood houses looked like ghostly, silent shapes fading into the thick New England mist, and the drive to my childhood home felt agonizingly long, each red light serving as a frustrating barrier, keeping me from reaching the people who needed my protection. When I finally pulled up to the curb, the grand old colonial house loomed through the gray haze, its windows casting a dim, uneasy amber light onto the wet, overgrown lawn. I killed the headlights to remain unnoticed and slipped out of the driver's seat, the freezing night wind immediately biting through my thin wool sweater. Scanning the deep shadows of the front yard, my breath caught in my throat until I spotted a small, trembling figure huddled behind the dense rhododendron bushes near the porch steps. It was my 12-year-old daughter, Nina Frost, clutching her thin autumn jacket tightly around her shoulders to shield herself from the cold. She was shivering violently, her shoes completely soaked from the wet grass, and her wide eyes darted anxiously toward the large glass windows of the living room. I quickly crossed the lawn, wrapping my arms around her cold frame to offer whatever warmth I could, and she pointed toward the heavy wooden door, too terrified to speak. I whispered softly for her to stay hidden behind the dense branches before I turned toward the house, with a cold, protective rage burning in my chest. Instead of marching up the highly visible front steps, I quietly slipped onto the dark side porch, twisting the old brass doorknob slowly to see if the lock would yield. To my absolute relief, the latch clicked open smoothly, allowing me to slip inside without making a single sound or giving any warning of my sudden arrival. The warmth of the hallway immediately hit my face, smelling heavily of old cedar wood and stale coffee, but the silence inside was thick and suffocating as I made my way toward the staircase, carefully avoiding the floorboards I knew would creak under my weight. Before I could even reach the bottom step, a long shadow stretched across the wooden floor, and my 42-year-old stepbrother, Bennett Frost, stepped out of the dark kitchen. He stood over 6 feet tall, his broad, heavy frame completely blocking the narrow hallway as he stood there with his arms crossed over his chest, wearing a smug, insufferable smirk. Bennett looked down at me, his eyes cold, arrogant, and mocking, instantly trying to use his physical size to assert absolute dominance over me in this familiar space. "What do you think you are doing here, Antonia?" Bennett demanded, his deep voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings as he took a slow step forward to close the physical distance between us. "You do not get to just walk into this house whenever you feel like it, especially not when you were not invited." "Get out of my way, Bennett," I said, keeping my voice flat, cold, and steady, despite the rush of adrenaline surging through my veins. "I do not think so," he sneered, puffing out his chest and narrowing his eyes to intimidate me further. "This is my house now, and I make the rules around here, so you need to turn around and go back to your apartment before I make you regret stepping foot on this property." He leaned down directly into my personal space, his breath smelling of stale tobacco as he pointed a finger towards the front door, loudly yelling at me to get out immediately. I stood my ground, refusing to take a single step backward, my gaze locked onto his hateful face as I prepared to push past him. The splintered wood around the doorknob of the upstairs bedroom was the first thing that caught my eye. Deep, ragged gashes marred the old white pine door, and tiny white fragments of painted timber lay scattered across the faded carpet like bone dust. I did not waste another second looking at the physical damage, using all of my strength to push the heavy panel open. Sitting on the floor between the brass bedpost and the cold plaster wall was my 72-year-old mother, Muriel Frost. She looked incredibly small, her frail knees pulled up toward her chin, while her trembling hands clutched a worn leather handbag with a torn strap. Her eyes, clouded with confusion and terror, darted toward me in a desperate plea for help that made my stomach turn over. "Antonia." Mom whispered, her voice barely a fragile thread that cracked under the weight of her tears. "He took the keys. He said I cannot leave anymore." Before I could kneel down to comfort her, Bennett slammed his hand against the doorframe behind me, his face twisted with a mixture of arrogance and absolute fury. "You are making a massive mistake by stepping into this room," Bennett yelled, his large frame casting a suffocating shadow over both of us. "Your mother is losing her mind, and I am simply managing the household finances to protect her assets from her own foolishness. She cannot even remember where she puts her medicine, so she needs structure, and she needs someone to enforce the rules." "You locked her in her own room, Bennett," I said, my voice shaking with a cold, focused anger as I stood up to face him directly. "You tore the strap of her bag and left her shivering on the hardwood floor. That is not structure, and that is certainly not protection. This is my property, and she signed the initial papers giving me the authority to handle these decisions." He sneered, taking another step into the bedroom and pointing his finger at my chest. "If you try to take her out of this house, I will call the police immediately and have you arrested for unlawful entry and kidnapping. You have no legal right to interfere with how I run this home." I ignored his empty threats, turning my back on him to focus entirely on Mom. I reached down, gently grasping her cold, paper-thin hands to pull her slowly to her feet. She was shaking so hard that she could barely find her balance, her fingers gripping my wool sweater as if she were drowning. I swept my gaze across the dusty nightstand, spotting her black purse and a small plastic folder containing her medical cards and essential identification. I snatched them up with my free hand, stuffing them into my jacket pocket without checking the contents. "We are leaving, Mom," I whispered softly, wrapping my arms securely around her waist to support her fragile weight as we moved toward the exit. Bennett stepped directly in front of the doorway, his chest puffed out, trying to block our escape route with his physical presence. "I said she stays here, Antonia," he growled, his jaw clenching as his fists tightened at his sides. I did not flinch, taking a step forward until we were almost touching, looking him straight in his bloodshot eyes with absolute certainty. "If you touch either of us, Bennett, you will have to explain those broken locks to the Hartford authorities before the sun even comes up," I said, my tone deadly quiet and sharp. For a fraction of a second, his arrogant mask slipped, revealing a flicker of hesitation that told me he knew he had crossed a legal line. He slowly stepped aside, muttered a hateful curse under his breath, and watched us shuffle down the narrow, dimly lit hallway. Nina was waiting near the bottom staircase, her face pale as she looked up at us, but she immediately took her grandmother's other arm without saying a single word. Together we hurried through the cold side porch and out into the freezing autumn night. The damp New England wind stung our faces, but the relief of reaching my SUV parked by the curb was overwhelming. I unlocked the doors, helped Mom into the warm passenger seat, and made sure Nina was buckled safely in the back before I jumped into the driver's seat. I started the engine, locked all the doors immediately, and pulled away from the curb, leaving Bennett standing under the dim porch light. The warm kitchen of my apartment offered a quiet contrast to the storm we had just escaped. The soft amber glow from the ceiling fixture illuminated the small wooden table where my mother sat, wrapped in a thick fleece blanket that seemed to swallow her fragile frame. Nina moved quietly around the space, setting down a steaming mug of freshly brewed ginger tea with a gentle touch before slipping into the chair beside her grandmother. I pulled up a seat directly across from them, watching as Mom wrapped her trembling fingers around the warm porcelain mug, her breathing slowly regulating as the heat began to soothe her frozen hands. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the gentle ticking of the wall clock, a peaceful rhythm we had not heard in months. Once she took a few slow sips, Mom finally looked up, her watery eyes reflecting a deep, hollow exhaustion that made my chest ache with immediate guilt. She squeezed her eyes shut for a brief second, a tear escaping down her wrinkled cheek, and then she began to speak, her voice trembling as she uncovered the silent nightmare that had been unfolding inside her own home. It began right after your stepfather passed away, Antonia. Mom whispered, her hands shaking so much that she had to set the mug back down on the table. Bennett changed the moment the funeral ended, as if he had been wearing a mask all those years, just waiting for his father to be gone. He took my keys first, telling me that a woman of my age had no business driving around the city alone anymore, but that was only the beginning of his cruel plan. She explained how Bennett had quietly gained access to her personal computer, changing the login credentials and the security PIN codes for her joint bank accounts without her knowledge. Over the next 3 months, he began systematically withdrawing her hard-earned retirement funds, draining her savings to pay off his personal credit card debts and fund his expensive habits. Whenever she questioned the missing balances, or asked why her monthly pension checks were suddenly disappearing, he would turn cold, raising his voice and telling her that she was simply confused and incapable of managing financial matters. He took my cell phone last month. Mom continued, her voice cracking as Nina reached over to rub her back gently. He told me the bill was too high and that I did not need to talk to anyone besides him, but I knew the truth. He wanted to make sure I could never call you to tell you what he was doing behind those closed doors. He wanted me completely isolated, alone in that big house with no way to reach the outside world. My blood ran cold as I listened to her, my fists clenching beneath the table as a wave of fierce protective anger washed over me. Mom detailed how Bennett's behavior escalated from financial control to psychological torment, using cruel punishments whenever she tried to resist his demands. If she refused to sign the financial documents he placed in front of her, he would lock her inside her second-floor bedroom for 12 hours at a time, leaving her in total darkness without food or water. He was trying to systematically break her spirit using starvation and isolation to force her into signing a power of attorney document that would give him absolute legal authority over her entire estate, including her beloved historic home. He kept telling me that if I did not sign the papers, he would put me in the cheapest, most neglected state-run nursing home he could find. Mom sobbed, burying her face in her hands as the painful memories overwhelmed her. He said that no one would believe an old senile woman over a successful man, and that you would never have enough money to fight him in a court of law. I was so terrified that he would actually do it, Antonia, so I just kept quiet and prayed that you would somehow realize what was happening before it was too late. The pale morning light of Monday filtered through the dining room blinds, bringing with it a sudden hope. I was pouring a fresh cup of coffee, staring blankly at the steam rising from the mug, when Nina walked into the kitchen carrying a dusty pink tablet. It was an older, slightly scratched device that she had left tucked deep inside the wooden hawk chest in my mother's bedroom during a summer visit last year. She slid the tablet across the table toward me, her thumb tapping on a small gray icon labeled with a standard child monitoring application. I completely forgot this was still active, Mom. Nina said, her voice carrying a quiet excitement as she leaned over my shoulder to point at the screen. When I was staying there last July, I installed this app so we could play walkie-talkie games across the hall, and it has a built-in safety sensor that automatically starts saving audio whenever it detects loud noises. With trembling fingers, I tapped the play button on the first file, which was time-stamped just 3 days ago. The scratchy, distorted audio filled the quiet kitchen, but the cold, booming sharpness of Bennett's voice was instantly recognizable as he screamed at my mother. "You will sign this power of attorney document today, Muriel, or I swear you will spend the rest of your pathetic days staring at concrete walls." Bennett's recorded voice roared, followed by the terrifying hollow sound of a heavy wooden door slamming shut. "Nobody is coming to save you, and your precious Antonia doesn't have the time or the money to protect you from me. So stop fighting and hand over that pen. Listening to my mother's quiet, muffled sobbing in the background of that audio file sent a wave of absolute fury and ice-cold dread straight through my veins. The tablet held 4 more separate recordings, each one capturing a different afternoon of relentless intimidation, locked doors, and malicious threats to send her away to a state institution. This was the definitive proof we needed. A solid digital weapon that would completely strip away his arrogant mask and expose his cruelty to the Hartford authorities. I immediately plugged my phone into the tablet, transferring the audio files to my cloud storage to ensure we had multiple backups that could never be deleted or destroyed. Just as the final file finished copying, my smartphone buzzed violently against the wooden tabletop, displaying a text message from a number I had blocked but immediately recognized. Bennett had bypassed my settings using a temporary digital phone application, sending a cold, hostile ultimatum that showed his desperation to regain control of the situation. "You have until 6 o'clock tonight to bring Muriel back to her rightful home, Antonia." The message read, the text stark and threatening on my glowing screen. "If she is not sitting in her living room by then, I am heading straight to the police station to file formal charges against you for elder kidnapping and grand theft of her personal documents. I have already contacted my lawyer, and we will make sure you lose custody of your daughter and spend years behind bars for this illegal intrusion." I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment, my initial panic quickly transforming into a solid, unwavering determination to finish this fight. Bennett was clearly terrified that his financial cash cow had slipped away, and his desperate threats only proved that he was finally realizing how vulnerable his legal position actually was. Instead of replying to his hostile message, I calmly locked the phone, grabbed my keys, and decided it was time to put our evidence into the hands of someone who could legally destroy him. The scent of fresh coffee and old paper filled the legal office in downtown Hartford on Tuesday morning. I sat quietly in a leather armchair across the polished mahogany desk from my lawyer and close friend, Damon Vance. For over 10 years, Damon had helped me navigate minor business contracts, but today, his expression was entirely grim as he focused intensely on the digital audio files playing from my laptop. The silence in the room became heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the heating vent and the sharp recorded outbursts of Bennett screaming at my mother. Damon stared at his notepad, his jaw tightening with every cruel threat that echoed through the small office speaker. When the final recording clicked to an end, Damon leaned forward, pressing his palms together as his sharp gray eyes locked onto mine with complete seriousness. "This is not just a heated family dispute, Antonia," Damon said, his voice flat, professional, and filled with deep concern. "Locking a 72-year-old woman in her bedroom, withholding her communication, and draining her pension accounts is a clear textbook case of elder exploitation. Under Connecticut law, this physical restriction and severe financial manipulation constitute major crimes of elder abuse and coercive control." He explained that the state of Connecticut took elder financial exploitation extremely seriously, and the evidence we possessed was more than enough to trigger immediate judicial intervention. Damon reached for a stack of legal documents on his desk, already beginning to draft an emergency application to the Hartford Family Court. "We are going to file for an emergency temporary protective order under the Family Abuse Prevention Act." Damon explained, his pen moving swiftly across the paper as he noted down the specific timestamps of the recordings. "This petition will legally bar Bennett from entering your mother's property, completely stripping him of any authority he claims to have. At the exact same time, we must prevent him from doing any further damage to her finances before he realizes she is gone." Damon picked up his office phone, immediately dialing a direct number to the fraud department of the National Bank, where my mother held her accounts. Because we had her medical records and her physical identification cards, Damon was able to act with incredible speed under the emergency elder protection protocols. He spoke with the bank manager in a firm, commanding tone, citing the pending court application and the documented evidence of unauthorized online pension withdrawals. Within 15 minutes, the manager confirmed that they had initiated an immediate temporary freeze on all accounts registered under Muriel Frost. This crucial administrative move completely severed Bennett's online access, blocking his ability to transfer the remaining funds or modify the account PIN codes. We have frozen his access, but we must act before he attempts to retaliate, Damon said, sliding the completed court petition into a thick manila folder. If he discovers that his cash cow is completely gone, he will likely try to hide or destroy your mother's remaining legal papers inside the house. I am going to walk these documents directly to the Hartford probate judge this morning to get the emergency order signed and finalized. What about his text messages threatening me with kidnapping charges? I asked, my voice carrying a lingering trace of anxiety as I remembered his hostile ultimatum. His threats are completely empty, Antonia. Damon replied with a confident, reassuring smile that immediately eased the heavy tension in my shoulders. He is trying to scare you because he knows he is trapped, but the court does not look kindly on abusers who accuse others of crimes. With these recordings and your daughter's eyewitness testimony, the judge will see through his desperate performance in a matter of seconds. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, and assured me that he would handle the court filing personally while I returned to my apartment to keep Mom safe. I stood up as well, feeling a profound sense of relief washing over me as I realized we finally had the full weight of the legal system on our side. The fight was far from over, but the protective legal net was rapidly closing around Bennett, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. The mahogany benches of the Hartford probate court felt cold and solid beneath my hands. The silence in the high-ceilinged room was heavy, broken only by the quiet rustle of legal documents and the steady, calm voice of my lawyer, Damon. Standing before the bench was the presiding family court official, Judge Arthur Morrison, whose stern gaze remained fixed on the evidence before him. Damon did not hesitate, immediately presenting our formal petition alongside the crystal-clear audio recordings that captured Bennett's cruel, booming shouting and relentless financial threats. The sharp recorded voices filled the courtroom, echoing loudly off the wood-paneled walls and leaving absolutely no doubt about the relentless terror my mother had endured in her own home. Nina stood bravely beside me, her young voice quiet but completely unwavering as she answered the judge's questions about that foggy autumn night with absolute clarity. Bennett sat at the defense table, his arms crossed tightly, staring at the floor with a dark, stubborn scowl, while his expensive private attorney tried to defend his client, desperately arguing that these actions were merely strict caregiving boundaries for an aging parent who was losing her memory. However, Judge Morrison raised a hand, silencing the defense immediately with a look of pure disgust that showed he had seen through the empty, calculated manipulation. There is a vast, unmistakable difference between caregiving structure and systematic psychological torture. Judge Morrison announced, his deep voice carrying a thunderous authority that made Bennett flinch. The judge signed the final documents with aggressive, decisive pen strokes, sealing a permanent protective order that stripped Bennett of any access to my family. The court ordered Bennett's immediate permanent eviction from the historic property on Elm Street, warning him that stepping foot near my mother again would result in immediate arrest. Furthermore, the judge ordered Bennett to pay full restitution of $20,000 in stolen assets, representing the exact sum of the pension funds he had illegally drained from her bank accounts over the past 3 months. The court did not stop there, officially transferring the complete case file to the local police department for immediate criminal prosecution of elder financial exploitation. Bennett's face turned instantly from a flush of arrogant anger to a pale, terrified mask of shock as the court officers stepped forward to escort him from the room. He attempted to shout a protest, but Judge Morrison sternly warned him that any further outbursts would result in an immediate charge of contempt of court. There would be no negotiation, no second chances, and absolutely no reconciliation as my family cut ties with him completely and permanently. 2 weeks later, the winter-bound, crisp autumn breeze of Hartford carried the sweet scent of dry leaves and damp pine needles across the front yard. I sat on the wooden porch of our historic family home, wrapped in a warm blanket as the gentle afternoon sun cast a beautiful golden glow over the quiet street. Mom sat beside me in her favorite rocking chair, her face peaceful and free of the heavy tension that had shadowed her eyes for so long. She held her warm mug of ginger tea with steady hands, her soft laughter mingling with the gentle rustling of the red maple trees surrounding the yard. Nina was sitting on the steps playfully tossing dry leaves into the autumn air, her bright smile a beautiful testament to the safety and freedom we had fought so hard to reclaim. We had survived the dark, suffocating storm of abuse, and now the simple warmth of our family table was our reality. For the first time in years, the old house felt like a sanctuary of peace, rather than a fortress of fear, and we knew that Bennett could never cast his shadow over our lives again. Bennett eventually faced full criminal prosecution, ultimately losing his reputation, his freedom, and every single penny he had attempted to steal from a vulnerable elderly woman. This painful journey taught us that silence is the greatest ally of an abuser, and standing up for the people we love is a sacred duty that we must never abandon. It reminds us that we must always listen when our children whisper for help and protect our elders from the shadows of exploitation. To everyone who has listened to our story of family justice and survival until the very end, we extend our deepest gratitude for your precious time and support. Your presence means the world to us, and we would love to hear your thoughts and personal reflections on this journey in the comments below.